Good afternoon, everybody. I want to welcome everybody to today's meeting of the Harmful Algal Bloom Task Force. Happy New Year to all. This is our first meeting of 2023. I hope you all have enjoyable holidays and that the New Year's off to a good start. I want to remind everybody that this meeting is open to the public, and I want to welcome any guests who may have joined us today and are watching. Public comments will be accepted via call-in during the designated portion of the meeting. That's at 2:15 today. This is a short meeting. It's just from 1 to 3. And if you can't hang around for the designated call-in portion, we always welcome comments through our online forum that's available at myfwc.com/taskforce. Before we do the roll call today, I just want to highlight a few membership changes since we last met. So as some of you know, Andy Reich, who was formerly with the Department of Health and has since retired, he had stayed on with the task force and was a really valuable contributor. He has decided to step away, so he has left us. He will not be replaced, as we have Rick from the Florida Department of Health, so we have that representation. From the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, the representative for FDAC, Charles Culpepper, he left the agency. We have since appointed a replacement. It will be Michelle Smith with FDAC. She's the environmental administrator over the Shellfish Harvesting Area Classification Program. So she essentially, if you remember Jill Flieger, who was Charlie's predecessor, she replaced Jill in that program, and we hope to see her at our next meeting. She could not make this one. And I also want to mention, it came up in a past meeting, I'm officially passing the torch today. I'm handing off my role as chairperson of the committee to Kate Hubbard. I've really enjoyed my time in this position, and I've loved working with you all very closely, and I probably will not be too far from the group. I will continue to be involved in helping to further the efforts of the task force and the recommendations that they make. So I'm just going to get us set up. We'll do roll call, we'll do the agenda, and then I'll officially hand it over to Kate. So I think we might be missing a few members. I'm just going to read down the list for the record and to check everybody's AV. Don Anderson, do we have Don Anderson? Don't see him. Do you have an update?
He's having some challenges logging in, so he should be here in a few minutes.
So Don should be joining us. Rick Clark.
Present.
Dwayne DeFries. Have we heard from Dwayne? No? Okay, not here. Quay Dorch. Quay, is your audio working? While we wait for her, Kate Hubbard, here. Charles Jacoby.
I'm here.
Barb Kirkpatrick.
I'm here.
Terry Larkin.
Here.
Rhonda Watkins. Is your
Here.
audio working? And David White.
And I'm here.
Way. No? Okay. We'll let you work on that. So I'll just briefly review the agenda. It's I wouldn't say it's light, it's just a quick day. So we have a series of updates scheduled. We'll get a Bloom update from Kate. We'll have an update on the HAB grants program from Megan Abbott, and then an update on the HAB Health Resource Guide from Megan Abbott. We'll have, I think Kevin Claridge is joining us to give us an update on the Remote Red Tide Technology Development Initiative, and then we'll have an update on the HAB Communications Working Group by Charles Jacoby. At that point, well, we're going to take a hard break from 2 to 2:15, regardless of where we are in the update. At 2:15, we'll open up the phone line for public comment, if there is any. And then we'll have initial roundtable updates. Rick Clark is going to talk about the Have Health Working Group, and Quay is going to talk about the South Florida Have and Hypoxia report, and then Kate's going to give us an update on Florida Have-On and the Center for Red Tide Research. We'll have a little bit of discussion at the end to talk about what we want to do next and future meeting topics. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Kate. Welcome, Kate.
Thank you. And before I get started with a Bloom update, I just wanted to pause and say thank you to Leanne, thank you to task force members past and present for all of your service. Thank you. Okay. And then I do have slides for the Bloom update. This is a Crania brevis Bloom update. And if we could get those loaded, that would be great. So I just wanted to provide a quick overview of the Bloom, where we're at right now, but I will take us back a few months. So in October, things were actually looking pretty quiet still. We did have Hurricane Ian pass through at the very end of September. And what happened when Hurricane Ian passed through, there was localized upwelling along the shelf. And we suspect that this helped lengthen those subsurface currents and bring in cells from offshore. And it was interesting, generally we would see that associated with the loop current, but this year it was associated with a hurricane instead. And so I'll just go through these slides really quickly, but this shows the very first observation of cells that we had in October after that passage. It was maybe 11 or 12 days after the storm passed, and we started to see cells, very localized in Sarasota County. And then, pretty quickly things progressed, and we started to see the Bloom expand more to the south. And so this is just showing some of our status updates with the cell counts plotted over remote sensing imagery. This is chlorophyll imagery, which is a proxy for algal biomass. And the warmer colors in both the dots and the imagery behind the dots indicate higher levels. And so we can see that we have a Bloom that's extending more than 15 miles offshore at this point. And as we proceed through, so this is the end of October, 1 month after Ian passed. As we proceed through, we see that throughout November, the Bloom kind of moved further up the coast. There's still a patch kind of down to the south, and some of that offshore feature that we saw seemed to be kind of compressed. And so this takes us to the end of November. And partially when we have these cold fronts come through, that tends to push things south, and then those kind of relax, and then the currents move things back south, or north, excuse me. So we've been seeing that happen again and again. You can see the cells starting to make their way into Tampa Bay in the end of November, and we did see the cells get into the bay. So we're seeing basically the Bloom shift where it's now, more north. We are still seeing this little patch persist down south off of Collier and Monroe County. You can see the little orange and yellow dots down in the south. The Bloom did move into Tampa Bay, but it didn't stick around too long. It quieted down. And so this is imagery from the 3rd into the new year. We did see that there are some offshore patches still there, and this brings us now to the status report that we issued last week. And so we see that there's still a lot of cells that we're seeing in samples. We're seeing patches kind of all along the coast. However, it is quite patchy. And one of the kind of weird things that's going on, and this has happened in other years too, the chlorophyll signal, you can kind of see this here, but this is the last slide. The chlorophyll signal is pretty much gone. And while that might make us extremely optimistic that the bloom has dissipated, we know that it's still out there. And so trying to understand this particular phenomena is another challenge that we're working on. And so just to say that, having a lot of different tools available to us is certainly really helpful for managing this bloom and its impacts. And we do have a large-scale survey that will be covering a lot of this area this week with NOAA and other partners. And so I'll just kind of stop there. And we can take the slides down too.
So let me check and make sure you can hear me. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you quite good. Great. I don't have slides prepared, but I did want to mention that we have been keeping an eye on the Indian River Lagoon as well. And I can hand this over to Chuck if you want him to talk briefly about it, but just in terms of the chlorophyll imagery there, unfortunately they're not seeing necessarily the same thing that we're seeing with red tide. There has been some pretty intense looking chlorophyll water discoloration in the IRL, and so it seems like it's most likely cyanobacteria. I don't know if we want to say anything more than that, Chuck.
So yeah, particularly Banana River Lagoon has been relatively green, but what we're also seeing is the fact that it seems to be mainly picocyanobacteria, and so there's some issues with the way lab chlorophylls are done because they're so small that they pass through the filter for a while, so you lose some early on and as you filter, and the continuous monitoring devices do not pick up phycocyanin, which is the pigment that seems to be the one that these particular picos have the most of. So we're getting this kind of mismatch between the satellite image, which looks green, and the rest of the world, which says, no, it's not green.
So,
Hey, Chuck. Sorry, this question. On that filter size, do you know what that filter size is?
There's two different ones that are used, and the GFS works probably better than the GFC. So, but we're going to check out if there are other ways we can maybe do a little better job. We might have to double filter if we're going to be dealing with these.
Is it okay? Is it a specific pore size that they're going through?
Well, those don't really have actual pore sizes. They have nominal pore sizes.
Okay.
And so again, these picos are, very, very small, and so they pass through that nominal pore size, at least until the filter gets a bit clogged. So.
Okay. Thank you.
That's on the order of 0.6 to 0.7 microns usually for the GFS. I can't remember in GFC if that's the same or if it's different. So a couple things going on, some interesting challenges in terms of trying to use the satellite imagery to track blooms. And so I think that's all we have for bloom updates today. So with that, we will move to Megan Abbott, who will give an overview of the FWRI HAF grant program.
Okay, thanks. I had, based on the last recommendations and progress report, there were a few items under management response and research that we had in the appendix for updates, and I wanted to be sure to let you know the progress that has been made since that last report on those. The first is the HAV grant program. We have did a cycle, as you know, last year and went through a competitive process to fund 3 projects in the priority areas. Those specifically, as noted here, were to evaluate and compare socioeconomic impacts of blooms, improve prediction models, and try to reduce economic impacts of blooms on shellfish leases. The 3 projects were funded. The cycle began this month. As of the beginning of January, the projects will be beginning. This includes, the first one is Dr. Krista Court with the University of Florida, and this project works on leveraging recent research results to quantify socioeconomic, health, and environmental impacts of red tide events to develop an index that can help to quantify the vulnerability of coastal communities to red tide events. The index is hoped to increase general awareness, and that will be used as an objective criteria to help decision makers both identify areas that are more vulnerable to the impacts from events and design systems to better prepare for response and mitigating the impacts of them. So this index has not been created yet. The project would be to create it, and based on some of the other tools that have been created in recent years, and to build off those. And hopefully we'll see great results from it. The second project is Dr. Yonggang Liu from the USF College of Marine Science, and he's developing a physical biological model of Carinae brevis red tide for the West Florida shelf. Currently, while there are elements of both, we really are looking at physical models, so this will be working with he'll be working the Ocean Circulation Lab with the partners at Florida Fish and Wildlife, have research to join the physical and biological models for red tide on West Florida shelf. And with that, the goal will help to simulate and forecast red tide with more elements and predictability. And then the final project is Dr. Dana Wetzel from Marine Laboratory, and this project is aiming to develop a feasible land-based depuration protocols that will allow shellfish farmers in red tide impacted regions to have a chance to regain their crops and sustain their production. So they're looking at how long the closures might be and methods they might be able to use to get it back to market or to mitigate so that there's reducing losses during these periods. The second updates I was going to give, are on, again, from the last progress and recommendations report. As you know, we did, based on the recommendations of the HAP task force, we created an updated version, a second edition of the Resource Guide for Public Health Response to Harmful Algal Blooms in Florida. This time we did it, although we did a limited print run, we did it as a digital report so that we can keep it current and have regular updates to it. So at this stage, we are updating Appendix C resources to include more information for veterinarians and domestic pet owners. And we are also updating Chapter 2, the regulations and guidelines. Not much has changed in this area, but from the data point when we published it, the World Health Organization blue-green algae pieces, they were in process when we wrote the report, and they are now completed. So we wanted to add those recommended guidelines that came from the World Health Organization. The response plans piece, one of the major recommendations of the Harmful Algal Bloom Task Force was to develop a coordinated statewide response plan for red tide events. That's obviously something that we do with agencies a lot, but to increase the ability for anyone to step in to these roles and do it effectively and improve the communications, we started developing tabletop exercises with the various primary responders. So last year we did a state-level tabletop exercise specific to state agency, state-level response to red tide events. And we are now, we had various scenarios for that. We've mapped those out, and now we're going to test those scenarios a little bit further, going to the county and local levels. And that will be broken down regionally for that testing by areas most commonly impacted, those less impacted, and then up to the Atlantic coast. And I don't say too much about those because they're meant to be emergency response type scenarios, so we don't want to reveal too much information before the participants have had a chance to be a part of it. But the idea is, once we go through these exercises, we can map and collect enough information to create almost like an instant command system response guide. So those stepping in can come into the role, have a mapped out process of who to call under what scenario, and not just the individuals, but the specific office and position to help streamline communications and effective response. And that is all I have on those updates.
Thanks so much, Megan. I believe that is Kevin up next? So up next we have an update on the the Moat Red Tide Technology Development Initiative.
Hey, Kate, I'm here.
Oh, great.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Am I able to share slides, or Megan, are you going to just share the ones that, okay, just that I sent, okay. So I just got just a few slides to go through quickly here. One is on the Red Tide Initiative progress. So again, reminder, we're entering into year 4 of, we're in the middle, I guess you'd say, of year 4 of 6 of this 6-year partnership between Moat Marine Laboratory and the state of Florida through Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. You see on the left there the latest image of the accomplishments and priorities report, which is now available on the Moat Red Tide Initiative website, so you can go there and dig in a little deeper. Specifically, there's some charts that really boil all the information down of the progress of the many mitigation projects underway. And at the end, it also does include all the summaries of the projects and PIs. If you're looking for more information, be sure to let me know, and happy to connect you with them or provide the reports from such. Quick snapshot, over 200 mitigation compounds, you know, a lot of different things looked at. We've talked about this before in this meeting, this HAB Task Force meeting. Now we've had 4 RFPs, 4 webinars. We've conducted 6 of our Technology Advisory Council meetings. We've well over 100 proposals looked at, 30 projects that either underway or completed, should really say. 20 plus partners, including all the regulatory partners. I'll talk a little about more in a sec. You know, in these last few years, really looking for those mitigation tools that are most successful to fast track. Many of you visited the facility. Thanks for coming out and seeing that, or many of our partners continue to come out and look at the options and tools available there. Leveraged a lot of other federal and private funding to make every dollar from the initiative go even further. The public website, as I was talking about, has initiative updates as well as this overall report and more information overall about the initiative and background. If anyone from the public is not familiar and wants to get some of the background, it's all there as well. Next box, that we conducted the commercialization workshop at the Moat Aquaculture Research Park in August. We had over 75 attendees, and that was focused on looking at all the regulatory, commercialization, meaning the marketing, scalability, deployment steps that are involved with moving these mitigation tools to market. Again, as mentioned, here's the report. Was sent Friday to Governor, Senate President, House Speaker, and Executive Director of FWC and Secretary of DEP. And again, so probably about a dozen promising tools, I'll call it, or technologies that we're looking for commercialization steps on. What is it? I don't know if I click to the next slide, or you can. How do I do that? Click it? I click it. So here's just a quick snapshot of all the different partners. You can see both regulatory and state partners, and still working through many of those steps. Talk about that in a sec, but also some new companies that came during this year 4 event that have some presently used tools and technologies that are used for things in agricultural cleanup or maybe blue-green algae and stormwater in different parts of the country. That's me. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, like the 5th bullet down. We've been working with Microblift from Ecological Laboratories, but Extreme and De-Oil It are new companies as well from Heartland Energy Group and Green World Environmental is brought De-Oil It that's used with hydrocarbons in marinas presently. So some of those that are on the shelf with a slightly different use and working through the regulatory steps that are associated with that change. Some of these you look familiar, the macroalgae compounds. We've actually just recently received approval from EPA to move ahead with some of that and working with our partners in, I had just was up a couple weeks back, I guess, with Florida Department of Agriculture Consumer Services. They're talking about the pesticide registration steps, which is in addition to the DEP regulatory steps, but to start working some of these things like the macroalgae compounds through that process. The Prescott water treatment process, whether or not they end up using ozonation or not is still a question, but definitely the cavitation and oxidation processes seems promising. The UV lights, I think we talked about that in some of the previous, and he maybe even had a presentation from the gentleman from UK and continues his research to look at that as a mitigation tool. The quaternary ammonium compounds, the quats on the USF mitigation platform, looking at then moving that ahead in year 4. The polymer, whoops, got a typo there, coated nanoparticles of the University of South Carolina. Robot technologies, those that are used in some of the stormwater ponds and things in the Northeast, continue to look at those for identification of the phytoplankton and really just sucking up and removing and annihilating and returning the water. Clay continued partnership with Woods Hole, University of Central Florida and others on availability of that as an effective mitigation tool, and it's any concerns for that on the ecology. Next bullet, there's a lot in there. There's some, so we're starting to look at, putting different compounds together, whether it's the curcumin or the luteolin or other things that may be on the EPA approved list, which can move faster through the pesticide process, and combining it with some kind of a flocculin or carbon or clay or biochar for some residence time in the water column. The last 3, not necessarily on the front end mitigation as you might think about them, but we've been talking about them with this group as well, commercializing and removing the dead fish, getting that nutrient source out of there with Florida Gulf Coast University. The bioscanner and seawater, working closely with Department of Agriculture Consumer Services, Aquaculture Division, as well as our shellfish partners, Florida Aquaculture Association, and so forth. And then continued updates to the beach condition reporting system. As we all know, the importance of communication, getting that information out as soon as possible, and relaying it as real time as we can for public decision making. Next slide, please. A lot on that one. Oh, there's maybe I can click it. Sorry. It's all on. I backed up. Thank you. All on in that report again. So I'm going through this pretty fast, but. We've had the Governor Legislature Agency report. That's coming ahead in the next few months. MOAT will also be sponsoring the Oceans Day reception as well. We'll have many scientists up there with posters and partners. So if you're keep that on your calendar, I think it's March 22 to come and discuss with each of those PIs a little bit further. Quickly trying to move projects to get into those Tier 3 and Tier 4. If you don't remember that, I'll touch on that just at the very end. Really continue trying to socialize this research progress, moving it to the municipalities and counties and trying to partner up with them. For example, we have a letter of collaboration with the city of Sarasota here to maximize use of some of their water bodies for mitigation testing. Since building off of that workshop, there's the photo of the partially the big group that was there that August day. All the different steps that are still trying to get these to market, and a continued one still continues to be that permitting compliance one, and the many steps involved in that to get it out the door. I'll end with a couple slides on you might have heard, the U.S. Harmful Algal Bloom Control Technologies Incubator. We actually hosted a webinar on Friday. I think we had over 130 folks on that. That's kind of a successor to the things we've been doing with the Red Tide Initiative, but on a national scale. This is funding from NOAA in partnership with the University of Maryland. It's $7.5 million for 5 years, possible extension for another 5, with about $1 million each year going out in competitive RFPs for mitigation tools for both fresh and marine waters, again, national scale, but really looking at proof of concept where we can look at what's working in one scenario, one portion of the state, one ecosystem, one company, and try to bleed that across to some other areas. And hopeful for Florida as well with this, with the utilization of this for some of the other HABs. That's why I wanted to bring it up today, or bringing some of those proof of concept ideas back to Florida. This funding will also generate a mitigation tool and technology online database where we can start to archive a lot of this mitigation technology better, drop downs for each state, if you will, you can think of, or each HAB, and what are the options, and what has been approved by EPA or individual state pesticide licensing, or will have received water quality certifications to get into the water from each state's DEP or equivalent or FWC. To really organize the information and make it a lot easier. It's quite a complicated process for someone starting down that path, especially municipalities and things wanting to use these as tools. Last slide, a high-level overview of the U.S. Harmful Algal Bloom Control Technologies Incubator. You can see, again, this tiered step. It's always been trying to take it from that basic literature search or that tabletop up through the mesocosms, through the tank tests, to look at those exposure studies, look at the possible impacts on natural communities, and then you start moving out maybe liminal corrals or canals and marinas to try to get these things out in the field for commercialization. The incubator funding is more up Tier 1 and Tier 2 from NOAA, whereas the Red Tide Initiative really spanned all 4 tiers, or the phases that you see there. That's NOAA lingo for in the PCM HAB world. Quay probably relates and understands a little bit to that, and Felix Martinez there. And I think that's all I had sent you, Megan. I'm happy to take any questions. I know I blew through a lot of that fast, a lot happening.
Thanks so much, Kevin. Any questions for Kevin?
Sure. This is Don, fighting with Microsoft, with Adobe Connect as usual. Kevin, thank you. I'm wondering what you think the prospects are for another 6 years, and what are you doing in terms of setting the stage for a continuation?
Complicated question, Don. I also, looked at a lot of the folks, in the task force for some assistance with that. But I think first the positive, we will have results at the end of 6 years, as promised from Mo. We will have some to take to market, and we're working through that. Obviously, always more time, I think, would allow for additional studies, additional partners, additional testing. Looking at field deployment, secondary and cumulative impacts, of anything that you're putting into the water, utilized, and success of that. Haven't got quite to the question yet of moving forward. Still in the throes of year 4 of the present funding.
And I guess just to follow up, when do you think I don't understand funding in Florida, but I know if we were trying to do this at the national level, we'd be starting now if we wanted to actually have something that was a continuation, immediately after your 6 years is up without any gaps. So maybe you don't have to start so far in advance, but anyway, it just seems like something to be thinking of and planning for.
And I'll also add on, with the HAB Control Technologies Incubator, we hope to have several coming out of that with some new and elementary ideas through Tier 1 and Tier 2 that we can work with NOAA, either moving into PCM HAB or for utilization in Florida with some other pots of money to move into the field. And maybe even by year 6, if we're lucky enough to get some good ideas out of that.
Kevin, are you able to go through a little bit of the process, a little bit more of the permitting process? So that's permitting for moving some of the trials into the field. And could you just talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. From a high level, EPA is probably the first stop, to see if it's on those approved lists, if it's already included in something that they've already done, the full gamut of looking, is it safe to go into the field? Is it already in a existing other chemical? And there's the list, I think it's they call it the 25B, it's section 15225B, and you can find that on the pesticide registration list. And then you kind of move into the Safer Florida through the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, which looks a lot at the EPA listing. Is it already approved? Is it included in another compound? What is EPA saying about it? And EPA has several different, it's hard to get in that short conversation, even devices and different things. There's different stovepipes, and Quay can probably explain more of this better than any of us. But then Florida, each state would have a say on that. So would they agree? And again, they've been talking with their office. They look to EPA's decision, but not solely. And then you also, to get it into the water, it possibly could trigger 2 different sides of DEP, and we're working with them right now. And we probably had, 6, 8 pre-application meetings with them, with some of these different folks that are having the promising technologies move along, to see if they may qualify for a de minimis exemption, or they may require a full individual environmental resource permit, and the addition of the possibility of a NPDES permit as well, similar to the stormwater discharge items. And those issuance of those permits, I know they reach out to folks like FWC for consideration on habitat and species and threatened and endangered and so forth. And that also involves Army Corps of Engineers for navigation concerns, or possibly even U.S. Coast Guard, depending on where you're putting your device and things. And then sitting here looking at Rick as well, I would say, a key component of that is also the same conversations we've been having with DOH. Maybe not necessarily the form, the checkbox or the document, but definitely close collaboration with Department of Health with anything we're considering out there, wanting to make sure publicly noticed, all those types of things before we got to that step. So it's a process.
Thanks so much, Kevin. So that permitting is basically another step along the way, but it's a really important one. I had one more. Oh, sorry, Pat.
I was just going to say, Pat, as we look into year 5 and 6, we are, looking heavily at that, as well as the scalability of a lot of these. So we see the next RFP moving more towards assisting those kind of complicated efforts through the regulatory, but also the, I don't even call it small business innovative research style work of how do you start to scale some of these things up. And I know this group has had some of those conversations along the way of learning from the things Don has done, and trying to move these through and think about those steps at the same time. Sorry, go ahead on your second question.
Well, the second question, could you just say a few words about how, because you'll have overlap with the incubator and the initiative, and I was just wondering how those two things, are there any plans to synergize?
Yeah, good question. I think the timing is, we got lucky very well how this worked out, because again, thinking the HAB incubator on the national scale is the Tier 1 and Tier 2. So many of those items will be starting at that tabletop, that beaker, and utilizing the mesocosms and the raceways. Hopefully, produce other considered items. I'm beginning by the time we get to year 6, or if there's real promising things. To Don's earlier question, that sure would be great to try to keep moving those to possibly to market as well. So they won't exactly overlap, but I'm hoping it brings more of those companies that already have some of those early EPA and regulatory approvals, maybe even for other uses, but it's already being put into the field one reason or another, that can move faster and catch up to be ready for those Tier 3 and Tier 4 with just a little bit of testing.
Thank you. I don't have any questions, but I do see Barb has her hand raised, and I saw Clay Square go green. So let's start with Barb, and then we'll move to Clay.
Okay, thanks, Kate. Hi, Kevin. I was at the meeting in August, and I think quite a few other task force members were there. And I guess one of the things I would like to see clarified is, well, two things really. It wasn't clear to me as projects were presented that people were using, for example, the same cell count density pre-post, the same amount of toxin density, whether it be 48 hours, 72 hours, whatever the timestamp was. And so I think from a value of each strategy, it was really hard to compare, because at least I didn't hear that everybody was using the same protocol. And along with that, it was confusing to me, at least. It wasn't clear how people move from Tier 1 to Tier 2. Yeah, I get the volume thing, but as far as what are the criteria of success to move from Tier 1 to Tier 2, et cetera, I think needs to be standardized. If it is standardized, that's great. I just didn't hear it. And I think that as you move forward with the national, and we're now going to different species as well, standard protocols so that people can assess from one technology to another would be extremely helpful.
All well said, Barb.
Any of my other task force members have comments? Because I know there were quite a few of us in the audience.
I'll make one quick comment, Barb, and that's that there's a good number of MOAT investigators who are on multiple projects, and what I've seen at least is that they are standardizing these parameters you're talking about. When I hear about other experiments being done in mesocosms, they're doing a lot what we did. We were the first ones to be doing that. In terms of cell densities, in terms of duration, in terms of the kind of parameters being measured, and how things are being mixed and so forth. So it hasn't been an initiative driven commonality, but more that if there are common PIs, they're sort of converging that way. That certainly doesn't include every project, but it includes a reasonable number of them.
My comment about standardizing across species and toxins is that because the species are different and the harms are different, it may not be possible to standard. What you do for dinophysis, for example, if we ever get to that point, would be really different than what you do for Corynea.
Yeah, I just meant within, so different projects looking at, for example, dinophysis, that they all are using the standard measures. I get that between species it's going to get really messy.
But I think, just to follow up a little bit, Barbara, I think as everybody goes towards these field pilot studies, there's a real, well, certainly there's going to be variability in the beginning, how many cells there are, what kind of weather is this and that. But in terms of the parameters that people monitor to see whether they have succeeded or not, that could really stand some discussion and standardization. I know what we think we can be measuring, but it's really the size of the team that will determine whether you can look at clams and worms and urchins and seagrass and you name it. In our case, we're lucky because we have NOAA PCM have funding and can have a reasonably large team, but the moat projects aren't nearly that big. So the people going to the field, I don't think they'll be able to measure nearly all the things that should be measured in a natural community.
Well, I guess the idea for the incubator is that you do it on a small scale, and then you apply for PCM HAB to do it on the large scale like you've been doing. So with the understanding that it takes a lot to get past that understanding of all the parts of the ecosystem.
And wait, is there anything else you wanted to mention about the national incubator? Just because I think it's good for folks to be aware that it's a potential incubator for PCM HAB, for example. I'm just trying to think, is there anything else programmatically that Kevin didn't bring up that might be good to share?
I can't think of anything right now. I think, unless there are questions about it specifically, that
Wait,
well, probably
is the incubator going to help at all with permitting and having a
yes,
sort of
absolutely
for permitting? Okay.
Yes, that what Kevin explained was it's, for example, that website that's being developed to try and look at the permitting, both federal and state, to the extent that it's going to be possible. This could turn out to be so complicated that it's going to be hard to come up with it, at least in my view of it. But I think at this point, Kevin, you know way more about it than I do, because when I started PCM HAB, we weren't even really aware that this was an issue. And the first panel brought it up to us and said, what are you going to do about the environmental stuff? And
I didn't even bring it up.
It is obviously. Yeah.
Barb?
I was just going to add, for people who may be hearing this for the first time, I saw my email came out today that the letters of intent for the incubator came out today. And Kevin, what's the deadline? It's fairly tight, January 31st or something?
Yeah, thanks, Barb. Yeah, I appreciate that reminder. Yeah, it is the January 31st, please. So it's a very short LOI, though, for anyone on less than 2 pages, really just an estimated budget, your PIs, your experience, and your, short scope of work. Maybe it's something that you're already utilizing in other capacities. So at least get that in the door. LOIs are required to be able to move to the proposal phase. Thanks, Barb.
But if you miss this one, there will be others. So
Rhonda?
Just a quick question for Kevin. I just browse through the report real quick that you guys just published, and in that project table where it shows which portions of the tiers have been completed, if someone is completed or a project has been gone through tier 1 and it says complete, does that mean that they're eligible for tier 2? I mean, are there any of those products being tested that didn't make it past tier 1? So they completed tier 1 and we decided we're not going to take it any further. Is there a way to tell that graphically, quickly? Just a question.
So you're looking at maybe how many went to tier 1 and didn't move on to tier 2. Yeah. And so many of those happened even off the initiative, that they were already looking at, because it can be done pretty quick and simple in the beaker style of cell and toxin testing. So I probably caught more of the ones that were formal ones under the initiative. I could look at that, Rhonda, and then see and try to go back in to see how many we have looked at that early stage.
Yeah, I just didn't want to assume that because it completed tier 1 that it was eligible to go to tier 2.
Well,
Or maybe I should assume that.
Many stopped at that stage, or many were already, hey, that's just not practical to move on because of those other things I was talking about, scalability, regulatory, all these different things. But the initial is to look at the impact on the cells and the toxins and maybe different dosage levels in small scale, so you don't have to spend a lot of time or money before considering moving to the, even if you moved up to the 10-gallon aquarium before you move to a 5-foot mesocosm. But the initial is to get past that, and thanks for drawing attention to that little spreadsheet. I think it's a quick and dirty way. Instead of reading the 30 pages that's in the report, you can look at that and kind of get a quick glimpse of which ones are moving ahead and which ones you'll probably hear about during the coming year. But those, again, somebody's going to start running parallel and me pushing with a lot of the partners of the mesocosm and the field implementation over the coming year to get all those pieces aligned for regulatory so they are ready if they do have successful mesocosm testing. A busy lab, a busy red tide facility right now,
Thank you.
Right. A question I had about the state regulatory aspect. Do they look at, so we know Corynea causes a lot of problems, or the cyanobacteria cause a lot of problems. One of the problems we had with NEPA originally within NOAA was they were looking at the control method and not the actual harm from the bloom. So they were saying, well, the control method will cause a problem. But the control method in relation to the harm done by the Corynea, for example, is much less in some cases. And so in the state regulatory process, do they look at the relative harms of the Corynea and whatever the control mechanism is? I see Dave smiling. You're muted.
I must have pushed it twice. Sorry. Can you hear me?
Yeah, now.
Okay. First off, I say in that context, no, it's not like what's the harm of not doing this versus the harm of doing this, right? I don't think that's necessarily how it's screened. It's more, currently there was a relief mechanism for those products, whatever you want to call them, methods, tools that fell into the basket of being a registered pesticide, and so there was a generic permit that would be easier to get than going through the whole process of getting a full-blown individual permit. So as long as you used it per label, as it was labeled for the pesticide, then you were good to go in a much easier, quicker way. So there was an intent to try to develop a second form of generic permit specifically for HAB response. It didn't necessarily have to be a pesticide, but it would kind of follow that logic. And in that draft generic permit, there wasn't that sort of, here's the potential effects of applying this compound, and here's its toxicity, and here's how it has to be used, blah, blah, blah. But here's what happens if you don't. That's not how that gets screened. But it all does fall back to, the NPDES permitting being delegated to states from EPA. So if you've had conversations where the feds are saying, what can be done at both the federal and state level, we can do whatever EPA will let us do to some degree. So if they're willing to back off on their requirements for us to make things work more smoothly, then, that's in their hands. Otherwise, we are held to the strict requirements of the NPDES permitting, and then we have to, go through the same rigor that we would for any other permit.
Well, the NEPA process for us is a little bit different than the actual permitting. You still have to do the permitting. NEPA just says whether we can fund them or not. And so we go through a whole internal process that says if this is something that might harm the environment, NOAA won't fund it.
Yeah.
And so you have to make this case that it won't harm the environment. Has nothing to do with permitting, unfortunately.
Actually, Quay, I was going to mention this previously when Kevin was talking. I think it does have something to do with permitting because we, for the PCM HAB project, it's a, what's it called? It's a restriction on your grant that you can't get funding until this problem with affecting the environment is approved by the government, right? Worrying about NEPA and everything else. So Felix Martinez's office went through, dealt with the marine mammal, the Magnuson-Stevens Act, the Endangered Species Act, on and on and on, 5 or 6 of them, and ended up writing a document that said what they thought was the case, started a consultation with U.S. Fish and Wildlife, who then signed off on it. The reason that's important is that when I gave a presentation down to one of the National Estuary Programs, people say, well, have you talked to all the federal people involved with endangered species? And at that point I said, no, we haven't. We've just dealt with DEP and the Corps of Engineers. And since then we've had a big conversation with a number of these groups, and they say basically that as an investigator, I can't talk with them. The federal program manager has to make the hook, as they call it, to get connected in, and they all then make comments about manatees, dolphins, critical fish habitat, all of these things they have to evaluate and then tell the Corps of Engineers, which is the lead federal agency in this, that it's okay, and then that part can go through. I'm, I think, very fortunate because that process you just described, being done up at NOAA, checked all those boxes and started that consultation. I didn't even know they were going to that level of detail until just recently. So now I'm taking all of that letter and all of the approvals that they sort of generated, or the evaluations, and we're going to give that to the Corps of Engineers. So I think the feds have a big role to play, actually. When you have federal
Yeah, I guess I haven't dealt with one like that, so sounds like a lot of work.
Yeah, but Kevin, you and I need to get back and discuss things because we've learned a lot in the last few weeks, as I just described.
Well, I think it's great that the incubator is going to be tackling that a little bit more at sort of the state and federal level. So it is an incredibly complicated process. I know I learned a lot just from hearing folks speak today. Let's wrap up and have a 10-minute break. We do need to be back right at 2:15 for public comment. And if we could just thank our speakers, Megan, Kevin, for this morning, and then Chuck, we'll start with you after the public comment period. Thanks, everyone. We'll go to break. Welcome back from break. We are now in the public comment period, and if you could please call in to, if you do have any public comments. And we will pause for a little bit and wait to see if we have any, and then we'll continue with our roundtable updates. And you should all be seeing the number, but just in case, the number is 1-800-832-0736. And then when prompted, you will give the audio room number. All right, we'll give another minute and then we'll pick up with an update about the, from the HAB Communications Working Group. And just as a reminder that the number will disappear when we move into the next part of the meeting. Let's go ahead and move on. If we could cue, I'm not sure, Chuck, if you have slides.
Yeah, there's one slide.
Awesome.
Thank you. So Rhonda and I chair this august body. Recently we had some revisions in the membership, but we have 12 members, multiple members at the sort of state level, the district at a regional level, county level people, as well as some others, Tampa Bay and Mote Marine Lab. One of the things that we've developed, and it's an ongoing living document, is this points of contact, which initially started with, people who should get information quickly, because they're going to handle a lot of the questions from the public. Eventually, we're going to try to create some tiers that would, take you from experts to, higher levels. Another thing that's a living document is the collection of frequently asked questions, facts and myths, and things that, you hear, see, or hear, and we try to come up with sensible answers to those and archive that. It will be used, Matt, when we have a repository for a lot of this material. Both RAC and business cards are being developed, so you can see the red tide RAC card on the far left there, and in the other image in the middle there, the red tide business card. And these have already been used by folks. When they're queried by the public, they can hand these out and point them at, a batch of more information. We're also going to create some animated films. The Red Tide 101, as I call it, is out there. That's a kind of a basic set of information about red tides. In the middle image, you can see the sort of the questions, the 3 questions that were answered in this video. That will be revised based on input from a survey that's out there. If you haven't gotten a link to the survey, you can get hold of one and please promulgate it. Had about 200 responses so far, and we're hoping to get some more. And then focus groups will be organized to go through the video and provide input on things that might be better done. I'm going to translate the videos into several languages, Spanish to start with, as soon as we can. The Tampa Bay Estuary Program and FWC are developing an infographic that can be used to kind of advertise this video. We have a list of videos that we want to work on. Seafood safety is the next one in line. Been working with FWC about hosting a repository of information developed by the Communications Working Group and possibly others, and that's underway. Also trying to come up with a social media plan so that we can, again, help people find these materials. And then been working off of the input that the Florida Sea Grant work gave us on signage. We're using icons such as the 2 in the center at the bottom, which is don't swim among dead fish, and that's a red with the cross through it, and then do wash your pets. So that's signage is still being developed and approved. think that's all I have.
Thanks, Chuck. Good summary of a lot of work. Any questions for Chuck? Be sure to check out the video if you haven't. Okay, so let's move on to our next speaker. We will have Rick Clark, and he will tell us a little bit about the HAB Health Working Group. Rick? Rick, if you're speaking, we can't hear you.
Sorry, I was just chatting away. So as I was saying, one of the things we developed in-house was a HAB Health committee here at DOH, but we didn't have the reach that we liked. So we approached the task force about taking on some of the coordination aspects of the HAB Health committee, and we are excited to announce that we were able to hire a facilitator, Lisa Krinsky at UF, to help us with that organization and facilitation. And we've had a couple of initial meetings, and we have an internal agenda planning meeting happening on February 3rd. And then our first official HAB Health Committee meeting will be February 20th from 11 to 1. And we're going to have a second meeting later on this spring and early summer. So that's our current plans with the committee. And the current members we have here, 3 members within the Department of Health, and then we have a list of really strong folks that are knowledgeable in the area, and we started out with this group in the hopes that later on maybe we can expand to a few more individuals, but for now this is our initial group that we'll be beginning with. Next slide, please. So this is led by FDOH with collaboration with FWRI and representatives of government, scientists, and health providers, as you saw on that list previously. And they will serve as consultants to identify research needs and associated improvements to surveillance, reporting, and education methods that will contribute to the elucidation and reduction of negative short and long-term health outcomes related to HAB exposure. And the HAB Task Force sees, considerable value in a long-term vision paired with significant and sustained investments that reduce HAB-associated risk to the public. So we're very excited about the task force helping us with this mission. And that's all I had. I'll be glad to answer any questions anyone has.
Thanks so much, Rick. Do we have any questions for Rick? Not seeing any questions. Great.
Hopefully at the next meeting I'll be able to share a lot of those details about our initial meetings and have more of an update at that point.
Great. Well, we look forward to hearing more updates in the future. Thanks so much. Okay, now we will move on to Clay Dortch, and she will give an update or an overview of the South Florida HABs and hypoxia report.
Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. So this was legislation passed June 16th, 2022, and I've made a big deal about the date, and you'll see why in a minute. And it's not something NOAA asked for. Its main purpose is to develop the South Florida harmful algal blooms and hypoxia assessment and action plan. So next slide. You might ask what they mean by South Florida. This is, everything you're going to see for a while is taken straight out of the legislation. This is not wording that NOAA chose or had any input on. And you can see that it's all the lands and waters within the administrative boundaries of South Florida Water Management District. Regional coastal waters, including Biscayne Bay, the Caloosahatchee Estuary, Florida Bay, Indian River Lagoon, and St. Lucie River Estuary, and the Florida Reef Tract. And I would actually, when I finish presenting, if I could get input from you all on some questions I have about what this may or may not cover, because my concern is it's quite restricted, and I don't know how many of you know that besides the legislation, which can be quite complicated, they also write a report, and in the report, which doesn't have the force of law, it talks about Kyrenia, and they're concerned about Kyrenia. So clearly, they're interested in more than this narrow definition of South Florida. Well, it's not a narrow definition of South Florida, but it's a narrow definition of the haves, where the haves occur that they're interested in. And so we can come back to that at the end of my talk if we have time. Next slide. Can I do the slides, or do you all have to do it?
You can try
If you
and
all have
click
to do it.
the arrows on the bottom. If
Oh,
not, then
okay. Yeah, oh, I see them. Yes, I see them. Okay. So there are two parts to the integrated assessment. One is an interim integrated assessment, and it's due 540 days after enactment. And then there's the finalized integrated assessment, which is due 3 years after enactment. And the text down here is taken directly from the legislation, and it tells exactly what is supposed to be in this report. So it's examine the causes and consequences and potential approaches to reduce HABs and hypoxia in South Florida, and the status of and gaps within current HAB and hypoxia research, monitoring, management, prevention, response, control activities that directly affect the region. I will say that it's very hard to figure out what would be different between an interim and a finalized integrated assessment, but that's something that we are working on. So the third thing that's due is the action plan for reducing, mitigating, and controlling HABs and hypoxia in South Florida. And that's due in 3 years plus 180 days after enactment. And there are some really specific things in here that, for the life of me, I cannot figure out why they want us to look at those. And it's hard to see how NOAA can develop an action plan for Florida. So this is, let's say, I consider this to be pretty awkward in a way, and we will need a lot of help with this. So what it requires is address the monitoring needs identified in the integrated assessment, develop a timeline and budgetary requirements for deployment of future assets, identify requirements for the development and verification of South Florida HAB and hypoxia models, and they want us to look at all the assumptions built into the models and the data quality used to ensure the best available data. This is quite specific in my mind. And then they want us to propose a plan to implement a remote monitoring network and early warning system for alerting local communities in the region to harmful algal bloom risks that may impact human health. And it seems like that what Kate is going to present shortly, the Florida HAB-on, is making a lot of progress along those lines. So I really don't understand what has prompted some of this. But if that wasn't enough, there's a couple more reports that are due. Well, there's a summary that's of the proposed plan that has to be published in the Federal Register 180 days before submitting the report to Congress. And then we have to provide biennial progress reports on the activities to achieve objectives of the first plan, with the first one due in 2027. And this is in perpetuity that we have to do these every 2-year reports. So we are on the hook for a lot in South Florida. We have put together a NOAA writing team right now, and it consists of me, Dave Kidwell, and Rick Stump. And then I'm going to mention Bridget Weimer, who is probably on the phone right now. She was earlier. We just hired her, and she's going to be helping with the reports. And we also plan to hire somebody else who's going to be helping with the reports, because this is a major lift along with all the other reports that we're doing. EPA so NOAA is responsible for the marine and estuarine part. EPA is stepping up and doing the freshwater part, and there are several people who are going to be working on that And these are all people from the Interagency Working Group on Habarka, which meets every 2 weeks and discusses anything having to do with Habarka from the federal agency point of view. And we will obviously also tap other federal agencies as needed. And then the last slide. This is the timeline just for this most recent report. And so we've already asked and received information from key groups. Anybody that's on this task force, I would consider to be a key group. So if you have not received anything or would like to provide information, let me know. And I will put you in touch with Bridget, who is currently right now going through everything that's been provided and collating it and figuring out which parts of the report that it is that they're pertinent to. We're also doing an extensive library literature search, and for the next 3 months or 4 months, we're going to be incorporating all this information into a draft. And then at some point, soon, hopefully, we're going to have a 3/4 draft, which we are going to provide for people to comment on. And in the April to May, and maybe now even the June timeframe, because we've lost some people and we need to get people on board to help us get this finished, we're going to hold public meetings so that people can provide comment. And these will be in person in Florida. We haven't started the planning process for that, but that's what we intend to do. And then after that, we will revise it based on the input. Then you could see it takes forever to go through all the agency reviews, and OMB will have to review it. And so the interim report, which will be submitted November, December 2023. You may wonder if you will get more chances to provide input. Remember, this is just an interim report, and there's all these other reports that are coming. So we fully intend to continue to get input from pertinent groups and the public as we go through this process. So could we discuss the geographic extent issue? I don't know whether it's easier to have the slide up or look at people, which would be to go back to this slide.
Why don't
The
we
question is,
and then go to conversation?
yeah, so my questions about this and the extent is it doesn't cover all of the area from Tampa Bay along the southwest coast of Florida, where most of the corynea blooms occur. And clearly they're interested in those corynea blooms. And does, by including the South Florida Water Management District and all of these bays and the reef tract, cover the area that they're probably also concerned about with regard to corynea? I have no idea what the definition of Florida reef tract is, and I so far haven't found a good definition of it. So anyway, that's the concern that I have about this.
And I would just add on to that and say that the Indian River Lagoon appears to be kind of segmented. And that isn't an area where we typically have corynea blooms, but it is an area where there are a lot of HAB issues.
Oh yes, and so the Indian River Lagoon is covered. So that's there in the second bullet.
But the Banana River and the Northern Indian River Mosquito Lagoon is not.
Oh, that's because whoever captured this map just grabbed one that was available. So the white does not, I think that just delineates the South Florida Water Management District.
Okay.
But the actual area that we're going to be covering, and somebody needs to make a map, probably not me, but somebody, of the actual area covered. So it's going to be the South Florida Water Management District plus the entire Indian River Lagoon.
Got it. Well, I can confirm it does not cover the areas where corynea is most commonly observed. And
so the South Florida Water Management District doesn't cover any offshore.
I mean, they extend a little bit offshore. There are blooms in the region that's kind of indicated from, you know, the Coxsahachie area south, but that's not our most prolific area.
Yeah, that's my concern, is it's not capturing the area that it needs to capture if they're really interested in Karinia. Does anybody else have comments on this geographic issue?
This is Dave. I mean, for the Florida Reef Track, I can point you to our webpage where for a review of our water quality standards, we're looking at updating our turbidity criterion, which is tied, the update is tied heavily to trying to protect corals. So there are several slides related to Florida coral community geographic area, and so that would give you something to go by.
Yeah, does that include the coral reefs that go up the west coast, where, for example, the area where there's the hypoxia sometimes from the Karinia?
I don't think so.
But I'd still be
look at it
interested
again
in finding that, yeah. Well, this is obviously something we're going to have to figure out.
Do we want to maybe take the map down so we can see faces and then see if there's any other questions?
Yeah.
Thanks. So any other questions for Quay or comments? I do think it'll be good to see the full domain kind of mapped out, and then we can comment further.
Yeah, we need to make a map. And Bridget, I think, is listening in, so I hope she's writing that down in case I forget.
Ray, I have a question. Have you heard rumblings where this is likely to happen in other states too? Is Florida kind of a test of sorts?
Yes and no. It's actually not the first one. We had to do this for the Great Lakes. And at one point there was, I forget whether, I think he was a senator, who wanted it for Washington State. And then more recently, somebody wanted it for Oregon. Everybody who is a member of Congress who's involved in the reauthorization of ABARCA wants to put their own report in it so they can hold it up and say, we're doing this. But this particular one actually has a longer history. It's appeared in other forms, specifically in ABARCA and going back quite a ways, and it got taken out. And it's also been a standalone in the past. And I was at a meeting once, and I can remember that Representative Mast was there. I'm trying to remember who else. And they really wanted it to have to do with flows through the Everglades. And we know, I kept saying, no, that's not that's not us. We don't do that. And so this is sort of what came from that a long time ago. And it is what it is. We just sort of have to do it.
Okay. Well, I think probably a lot of us have already been tapped, but I think it's also really helpful to have the context and to know how there's sort of a series of these and it will continue on.
Yeah, and if there are ways to make it useful, we would certainly be glad to hear how you all think we might be able to make it useful. I'll leave it at that.
Great. Okay, well, we will move to the next update, which is from me, and I'm going to give a little bit of an update. I don't have many slides on the Center for Red Tide Research and the Florida Hab Observing Network, or Florida Hab on. And just to give everyone a little bit of a reminder about kind of what the Center for Red Tide Research is. It was created in 2019, and it serves as sort of an umbrella for our HAB research and monitoring program. It also includes a lot of our partnerships, and these partnerships involve research, monitoring, other activities. It includes the task force. It includes the grant program that Megan referenced earlier. It also captures Florida Hab-On, so there's a lot of different connections and linkages between all of these different efforts. So I just wanted to mention that to start out with. And then in terms of the Center for Red Tide Research, we have some long-term agreements with MOPE and USF, and those have continued. We're about halfway through our cycle. We've had some exciting things that have come from that program. One little trivia factoid that I thought was kind of neat, this involves TCRUS funding as well, but USF had more than 300 glider days last year, calendar year for 2022. And so that's awesome when we think back maybe 4 or 5 years ago when we were having 1 or 2 deployments and generally not red tide focused. So lots going on, as you can imagine, with some of the field programs having sampling going on now for a few years. We're starting to see some really neat data come from that. There have been, I think we had 11 publications in 2022. Just a few of those that I wanted to highlight. There was one that came out of Plum and Who's group. This is remote sensing, looking at chlorophyll imagery, and basically coming up with a metric to evaluate the surface area of blooms that extends beyond where our monitoring samples are. So that was a really exciting effort, and that went back for the past 20 years to, again, try to look at bloom severity over time. We had another paper that was led by Yongwei Wu, and this was trying to understand why some areas seem to be worse than others in terms of Lucrania blooms, and found that the area just south of Sanibel tends to be retentive. And so that's another factor that can lead to more severe blooms in that area, worsening blooms there. So we're seeing some really neat things come out of those longer-term partnerships. We also, in addition to the grants that are starting this month, we also have agreements with several universities in the area. And just to give a quick overview, we have projects this year with FTCU. This is to increase offshore, nearshore monitoring, especially in the greater Charlotte Harbor area. We also have 2 projects, one with the University of Central Florida, one with Eckerd. These are focused on trying to better understand sediment dynamics and also trying to look for resting stages of Cranea in sediment. So we're using genetic approaches as well as microscopy for that. So that's something that's very exciting. We hope that there will be fruitful results from that in the future. We have 2 projects with Florida State universities that are looking at the interaction between Cranea brevis and nutrients, one that's more field-oriented and using isotope signatures, and one that's more lab-oriented. And we have a project also with the University of Florida. This one is a little bit different, but we are trying to look more at macroalgae or benthic cyanobacteria. And so this project is just sort of addressing a need that came up over the past several years in terms of a taxonomic gap that we had. And so we've been trying to fill that. And that can be really important just because a lot of these blooms do occur in areas where we also see Cranea. And so I think that they're probably very important for nutrient dynamics. So those are some of the projects in terms of how they interact with Florida Hab-On. A lot of the funding from these projects, but also other funding efforts, are helping to support Florida Hab-On. We will have a Florida Hab-On website coming out this year, 2023, and we also have not forgotten about the videos that we have during the workshop that were recorded. That's something we released the Hab Communication Working Group videos this fall, but we'll be planning a series of releases for these other videos as well in the upcoming year. And then just a plug, there is a National Hab-On seminar this week, and we will discuss ISPDs, including some of the work that's being done in Florida with ISPDs. And so that will be later this week. And just as a point of reference for that, we've had over 400 ISPD wet days since that program has started, and that includes over 100 days on ships and over 300 days submerged. So that program has grown quite a bit. We've learned a lot. We're continuing to learn, and so again, lots of interactions. A lot of these projects speak to each other, but they also speak to some of the recommendations that the task force has put out over time. So I think I will pause there and see if there are any questions. No questions?
Thank you for mentioning the webinar on Thursday. If you want to participate and you haven't signed up, I can send you the website.
Thanks, Clay. Okay, so we have a little bit of time left to discuss our next meeting, and tied into that are some future agenda items as well. So right now we have our next meeting planned for April 4th, 2023. And one question that I had for everyone, we have been debating with the idea of an all-day versus a half-day meeting. And so that was one question that we had to see if there was a preference. The half-day meeting would be virtual. So folks have any preference one way or the other? Yes, Barb.
Sorry, I wasn't ready to be called on that quickly. First off, why was our November meeting canceled?
There were a number of scheduling issues, and so unfortunately we just had to call it right at the end. And so it was unfortunate because we did have a pretty, a nice day and a nice agenda planned out, and so trying to bring some of that back at a future meeting is definitely a priority.
That kind of seems like low-hanging fruit for the April meeting, and I would advocate for an all-day in-person meeting, but perhaps someplace a little more readily accessible than Tallahassee.
Any other comments? Let's talk about some of the topics that we'll discuss, and then maybe we can go back to that. So some of the things that have come up in past meetings that I think we want to try to focus on in some future efforts are just trying to expand. We focus a lot on Crania brevis here, and so trying to expand beyond Crania brevis to work on some other HABs has been a growing priority, and I know that there's been some past discussions about that, and I wanted to see how folks felt with potentially creating a working group under FWRI to continue to push that effort forward. Obviously, it would involve a lot of different partners. Oh, Clay, you are on mute. You're on mute.
When you say push that effort forward, I'm not sure what you mean by effort. Could you elaborate a little bit more?
Sorry, I didn't hear the very first part of your question.
When you say push that effort forward, what do you mean by effort?
Yeah, so that's a very good point. So I think in terms of visualizing a product, having an overview of HABs across the state of Florida. My sense right now is that it would be marine and estuarine focused, but that's certainly something that we could discuss. But it would be a high-level overview. There would be some need to focus on regions and some focus on organisms. And as nice as it would be to say we break it down really evenly, just with the HAB issues we have in the regions, we may need to partition a little bit. And then, I think the goal is to have a document that we can reference that includes maps, it includes an overview of the organism. Some issues, and of course, thinking about kind of the state of the science as it is right now. And I think that's really important for thinking about what comes next. Yeah, Barb.
Well, I just, maybe I missed something. Is this kind of the way we're forming now, is into these working groups? And so every time we have a new task or a new issue, are we going to create a working group for that?
Well, part of trying to think about the expertise that is needed for the state of the HABs document, something like that. I think that's kind of where we probably are going to need to dial down and work with a lot of other partners. And so just trying to think about a way to facilitate that process.
Would the purpose of this be to eventually recommend ways forward? Is that what we're getting at?
Well, I think as a task force, as we move forward, as we think about future recommendations documents and how those might evolve, I think that this kind of information will be really, really beneficial for that process.
This is going to sound a little out of left field, but actually you and Don might understand where it comes from. In the Gulf of Maine, there's been that Gulf of Maine HAB Symposium that's now been going on in some form it used to be small workshops and has expanded enormously. But the value of it is tremendous, I think. And I wonder if something like that would be useful in Florida. I'm not sure that does away with the need for what you're doing, but the first one might be a way to get to what you're want to think about doing.
Yeah, and that's something that, Barb, you were on the steering committee, right? There was a Florida HAB meeting that was about to be organized right before COVID hit. And so I think that we have discussed a few times that there's plans to revitalize that effort, but so far I haven't heard whether or not it is kicking forward. And then there's also the blue-green algae state of the science. And if, I don't know if Leanne wants to mention a little bit more on that, or Dave, if you want to give it a quick overview. Tossing it to Leanne.
I'm sitting here raising my hand in front of Kate. I just wanted to back up a little bit and talk about the product that, we're talking about. We had discussed it before, and it's not like an in-depth state of the science. It's more of a high-level overview of the other HAB issues that we have in the state of Florida. It's for awareness for people, other managers or the legislature. It's, it's sort of like a layman's primer of HABs in Florida, and I think we can do that without any, symposium to gather that information, although we would want some other folks to help pull that together. So this isn't going to be an in-depth white paper. I'm thinking, 6-10 pages of HAB issues in Florida, and we had discussed this at a last couple meetings. And then regarding the HAB symposium, I think a Florida-centric HAB symposium would be a great thing. There was a little effort to try to spin that up, and it did die. It would be worth reviving. At the time, it was going to be hosted by Sea Grant, and they just don't have the time or the bandwidth to do that. They're working on a blue-green algal state of the science, symposium that will be happening in the spring. So it's definitely something that we could try to find a way forward on. But, you know, it probably wouldn't involve the original players on the steering committee in terms of organizing, you know, the people who are all fired up to help organize it. So something to consider.
And I'm not sure if they fully decided where the next USHAB meeting is going to be, but I know at least there was a pitch to try to have it in Florida. So, you know, hopefully you get more representation from the state that it's in when something like that happens. So,
Yeah, we've run into an issue that has to do not with Florida at all. It's getting to the point of being so big. The question is whether we need a meeting planner and use a different model entirely. And we're grappling with that right now. We're still thinking about Florida and a broader steering committee if it happens in Florida, but it is right now up in the air, unfortunately.
I know scheduling and trying to fit it in between the national and international HAB meetings, but especially the national one has always also been somewhat of a concern.
Yeah, that forces it to be fall of 2025. But, well, all I can say is we're working on it right now.
You mean 2024, right?
2024, yes, you're right. You're right.
So I personally would love to see a Florida HAB meeting, so I think it's a good discussion to keep having. I'm not sure if it could piggyback on something else or if it needs to kind of be its own thing. I think it will be really great to see how the blue-green algae state of the science meeting goes. And, you know, again, these are all really important steps and efforts. Yeah, Barb.
I was just going to say a few years ago, we did a Gulf of Mexico HAB primer, and it was targeted for Tallahassee type people. I don't know if everyone's aware of that, but that I think would be a good, I'd be more than happy to circulate it if people don't have a copy, but that would be certainly a good starting point for a Florida version without having to start at the beginning.
Yeah, and it's possible even that some of the requests related to the legislation that Quay mentioned, you know, some of these things might dovetail a little bit.
Yeah, I was thinking about that because if NOAA is doing this assessment and gets a lot of input from Florida, maybe that could be abstracted or, you know, the material extracted from that. No use repeating things, duplicating things.
Do we have any more comments on moving forward with a sort of high-level document? Okay. So in terms of pushing that forward, are folks generally okay with trying to get it formalized under FWRI and then reach out to the yes, it's 3:02. So we're getting ready to wind down. And I'm going to ask for a little help here. So I haven't had a vote called for a vote before, so this is something that, are we at the place where we would have a vote?
Yes.
Okay.
And, you know, to define what the actual vote would be. So as a way to expedite production of this type of a document, you know, the vote would be that the HAB task force recommend that the creation of this document would be essentially assigned to FWRI to complete with partners. And that would take, you know, the heavy lifting off of the task force and eliminate the day-long meetings of wordsmithing, et cetera. And there can be involvement by, you know, select members that have an interest and expertise and time in doing it. But basically, the Institute would be creating this product in support of, you know, the HAB task force recommendation that it would be useful.
But do we have final sign-off authority on it?
Not if we do it this way. That's the difference.
And the focus, you said, was going to be marine and estuarine versus more global freshwater, saltwater.
I think so, at least in this first stage. I could see later trying to merge that. You know, if we were to
Is it only getting into descriptions of the types of algae that Florida deals with as far as blooms, or does it get into the nutrient aspects or those types of blooms that are like imported versus, you know, developed here in nearshore waters?
Yeah, I think it would be kind of a high-level overview of things like that, but obviously it's not a scientific manuscript, so we would be able to pull out key details, but I think it's still going to be high-level. We would want to try to use a variety of reference materials, including manuscripts, publications.
I have one comment. Kate, as an outsider, one of the things I've seen, or an out-of-stater, is not a lot of, among the people who really argue a lot about nutrient links from human activities and agriculture to the red tides, a lot of those people don't trust the state agency. And a report on the state of HABs or CRENI or something that tries to address, even if it does it in a totally academic and unbiased way, the nutrient story might not have the credibility it would have if it was a report that was endorsed or that we had sign-off ability on it, or it was even done through our auspices. So that's just one argument against having it come through your institute, although I can see it as being nice to have someone else do all the work.
So when it comes from the Institute, it goes, I assume approval goes to Tallahassee, up the channels there prior to publication.
And generally something that involves multiple agencies does go through, you know, multiple agency reviews. So like everything that Chuck showed from the communications working group has gone through multiple agency reviews. Not everything, but a lot of the things. Other questions, comments?
Is this something that has to be decided right away, Kate, or can it be something we can bring up early in the next meeting rather than at the end of this one?
Yeah, that's a good point. We can continue this discussion and kind of hold the vote for that for the next meeting, and then we'll see if we have some additional members at that next meeting to get Quay back. Do we vote on holding the vote? It looks like people are nodding and smiling. If you're opposed to waiting to vote, I'm not seeing any opposition. Okay. So, yeah, we've got Barb, questions?
Well, I'm switching a little bit since we're trying to wrap up. For the agenda for the April 4th meeting, can we have the presentations on health that were scheduled for the November meeting?
I think that we will try to have some of those, but we're still working through that. I don't think it will be, as the Health Communications Working Group, Health Communications Working Group, sorry, as they start to meet more regularly and lay out their structure, I think that that's where we're going to start to hear more about some of those presentations, some of those issues. So I suspect that...
Well, but meanwhile, there are projects ongoing that I would like to hear how they're progressing.
Yeah.
I mean, epi studies.
Yeah, and I think that's partially, that's where the working group is headed, and so I think, yeah, it's important to have that information, and I see Rick raising his hand.
Yeah, I think one of the discussions maybe was as part of the Health Committee, maybe doing the presentations during one of their meetings and then invite task force members to view that at that point. Just as an idea, because we want the current Health Committee members to know what the state of the science is and what's currently going on in Florida. So we may choose to do that during one of those meetings and then invite you guys to watch that at that point. If we can't squeeze it into a normal task force meeting in the near future, because I think, like you said, it's important that you have eyes and ears on those projects sooner than later. So we wanted to make sure that happened for both the task force and the Health Committee.
And are the working group meetings publicly open and notified?
Those won't be because it's a subcommittee, but we can have task force members attend that, I believe, unless that's a rule that I think as long as everyone's invited. I'm not sure about in the Sunshine Law for that particular situation. Kate or Leanne, could y'all just talk about that, if that would be possible?
I think it's only an issue if things are discussed, if there's multiple task force members at that meeting talking about things that are going to come before the task force. If there's, decisions to be made, that spring from that meeting. So that's where we would have to be careful.
Yeah, so let us work on that conversation outside of this group, and then we will let the task force know what we can do and what we can't do.
Thanks, Rick.
Mm-hmm.
All right, we are 11 minutes past 3. Any final comments before I close the meeting? Okay. Well, I just want to say thank you, everyone, for coming today. Thank you for your participation, and I just can't say how much we appreciate it. Thanks to all of our participants that have been listening in, and I hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day. We'll see you again in April.
Thank you.
Thanks.